Well, welcome back, and all thanks to Special K. Welcome back, Dame Noeline Tairi. Thank you so much for joining us again.
So cool. Once again, good to be back.
Oh, it's great having you. So over our last sessions, we've gone over how you pick a team, and then our last one was building a culture, and we talked about building a house. So for this one, we'll flow on from that, and we'll look at, I guess, the people inside the house, the different kinds of people, and I guess we'll call it people management. But we'll start with the team and how, for you, obviously as head coach, how you manage a team when you look at the players. You've got players who aren't starting, injuries and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's taken me a while to get to the space where it actually sits right for me, I suppose. And as I've gone along, probably been really open and honest as much as I can with the players or whoever I'm working with. But it's great that you started off with the what we did last week and the culture, because in building the culture, you've got to work with the people at the same time. You know, you're building the house for people to live in or building the plane for people to fly at the same time. So it's sort of, you know, you're working two pieces, and because of that sort of process that you go through, then people have a buy-in to either the style or the culture or the team, and that's always a really good start. One of the things that I'm going to say, because it's always one of the stories that I always relay, because I think it's a big thing. In 2005, and I was still a fledgling coach, we did this session when I was with Magic with John Mitchell. And at that time, John Mitchell had said to me that obviously he was the All Blacks coach and got the boot, to be nicely said. And one of the things, or the learning points out of that, was he didn't communicate. He didn't feel to the CEO or the board enough. He felt he had good support by the coaches and that he was working with, and also the players. So he had massive player buy-in, but didn't quite do the next step. And that's something that's really stood me in stead, making sure that all the parties that you work with, that you spend the time. So, you know, obviously in a team, you know, the players are a big part of the equation. And oh my gosh, I can remember just being a young coach coming through and crying with somebody because I never selected them. And I thought, oh, this is so terrible. And sometimes I still actually bawl my eyes out. But after the fact, but what I try and do is make sure, one is my communication is really clear, that I suppose the principles, or if there's a certain criteria or a certain standard, would they be measured by, that's out in the front. I think integrity is really important as well, that you keep to what you say you're going to do. Once again, walk the talk. But also knowing that that communication piece is probably the biggest thing in building those relationships. So spend a lot of time on that when we're actually pulling the culture together, but a lot of times to make sure that people understand, if they're in trials, what are they being trialed on? If the fitness component, what's the targets? But also how are we going to help them? So it's not just leaving them, you know, in the abyss. It's making sure that we've supported them by giving them a program or helping them understand what's required.
And do you find with obviously different players, we all react in different ways? There's different ways to communicate. I found when I was a player and we did a dotting thing, like you had red dots who they like things to be noted down like this, and that's how they take that feedback. When you've got purple dots who like, I guess, a bit more of an explanation and stuff like that. So do you find you have to have different ways to communicate with the different players, because you've got all sorts of players and personalities?
Yeah, very much so. In the old days, we used to go on about VARC, you know, visual, audio.
Yeah.
I can't remember the
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was probably the pillars once again of the lines of communication, noting that people are different. That's a really good thing, that people are different, because they're going to bring uniqueness. They're going to be bring different ideas, and also, once again, when you do make a change out on court, they're going to do something that's different. And the point of difference, I think, in a lot of the teams that I've selected, is always the most valuable thing, because it just takes the opposition to different places and you're unpredictable. So, I think sometimes, a lot of times when we're talking about, as a coach, like a team, you think you want everybody to be the same or look the same or be the same, but difference is actually a really good thing. And as you've already alluded to, I mean, if I think about myself, I'm a really hands-on type of person. I've had to work in regards to, I'm terrible in written. That's why I've got a scholar, because she's brilliant at that. Sometimes my communication skills need a bit of work on as well. But I'm a hands-on type of person. I've got to be able to see it. I've got to be able to walk through things so that I can feel and I know exactly how it works in my mind. So, if once again, if you can cover all those learning aspects, so that it's a fair playing ground for everybody, that's a good start.
And you talk about the difference, and then when you're making changes on court, but then as a coach, how do you, I guess, people manage the difference in reaction, say when you're taking a player off the court? Different players will be like, yep, okay, that's fine. Other players will, their body language may drop. So how do you deal with those kind of differences when you're managing your team?
Yeah, look, I must say that I'm not the be or end all, and I put that out there right from the start. And once again, I think, different people will have strengths, and that's probably one of my weaknesses, if I'm going to be honest. Sometimes I'm so caught up in what's happening or what's required at that time that I don't follow through with communication. So really important, once again, that when something is done, that follow through is linked back to an experience. But usually with a lot of players that I've been able to coach, I can usually tell by their body language or the disappointment that all they need is to have that conversation. Sometimes I'm a bit slow in having that conversation, and I put my hand up to that, but I can usually tell that they need to have something or need to have a talk. What I find as well is that when you actually do talk just simple and normal and just face to face, and you do talk it through, that it actually gets out the other end when it's really positive. It can be a really positive experience. Sometimes I've found with players, they will never understand fully what your idea is and the reasons as to why, because they're feeling it at a time, and they may be quite emotional about the decision that has been made, plus also might be a bit emotional about their own performance as well. So, but at the end of it, it's once again is, okay, I take on board maybe what you've said. Whether I'm easy as, if I have to apologise, I should have maybe done this, I should have done that. These are the reasons why, and I'll think about it for next time. But I think sometimes those conversations can either be a one-liner, and you just got to work through to how you can get a win-win situation out the end, and that the players still feel like they're involved and that they can perform in the next game, and that's really important.
I agree, and I think as a player, you just have, I guess, that respect when you do ask for that feedback, that it is honest and you do get the feedback that you need to go, okay, great, now I know, so I know how I can be better for the next time. Another one I want to talk to you about, if I take you back to Netball World Cup with Katrina Rore and Michaela Sokolic-Beatson, when you've got players who are injured, and you had obviously had to deal with Katrina being injured, bringing in Michaela, and then I guess just sort of waiting to see if Katrina was ready, or does Michaela then come into the team. So what that's like for you as the coach and dealing with that.
Yeah, look, we've got some really good people that's involved in our management, and we had to be, as management, really clear about what the guidelines were in the first instance, but what we needed to happen for us to be able to decide whether we were going to take Katrina or not. And some of those discussions were really pearlers, holy heck, behind the scenes. They were very upfront, but we also knew that if we made the wrong decision for the team, and it had to be for the team, then there will be repercussions for the team once we took the court. So we had to be really mindful about what our deciders were going to be, or our pillars, or strategic drivers, or whatever, and very confident as a group that we were happy, first and foremost, that those were going to be the deciding points. So but once we knew that, and we knew exactly what that meant for Katrina, what her loads was, what she needed to do from one day to another. Really, one of our games when we had when we were in Colchester the week prior, Katrina actually wasn't ready to take the court, but we played against Scotland, and to some degree we had to see whether she could handle the load and handle getting out there on court. Sometimes it's not a physical side to it, but it's actually a mental shift that needs to happen. So I can't quite remember the details, but we needed to get her out on court. And if anything, from a medical perspective, they were really, they were uncertain, but they were freaking. It was too early. So the discussions around that, there was an element of risk. But if we didn't take that risk, we'd never be able to see Katrina out on court prior to going into the Worlds, which means we would never be able to test you. So out of that, the conversation needed to show Katrina what was actually happening behind the scenes, what's the science behind our planning, tell her that there is an actually element of risk if she does take the court, and what those risks will be, whether she re-injures herself or pretty much she gets on the plane and goes home. And out of that, she was willing to take the risk, and that was the first step to know after that game that she was on target. During that time, we spoke to Michaela as well as to what the process was going to be. And probably, if I can only say, to have someone like Michaela who was so selfless, but also knew what her purpose was. So, we probably had 3 or 4 days where we had to wait every day after we did something on court to see how her calf would recover. And so for those 3 days, pretty much, Michaela was just hanging in the wings to decide or to wait for that final decision. But the communication, once we knew as a group, pretty much we were open with both Michaela, both Katrina, and also the leadership group. So everyone knew what was going to happen, depending on what decision was going to end or who was going to stay with the Netball World Cup team.
And I remember the team was so together, being there, and once everyone realised that Katrina would be okay, and then it went from everyone being, I guess, excited and then to sad, because Michaela, she knew that she obviously was on a plane back to New Zealand, but you touched on something really important, that it's what's best for the team. And I think you had that as part of your culture. Everyone knew that whatever decision was made was going to be what was best for the team, not about the individual.
Yeah, exactly. When we are selecting players or people, or even management, or recruitment, it's always that overarching thing. It is about the team, and that's myself as well. So it's getting not necessarily over the ego, but making sure you're really focused on the end point. And then at the end, we all know that we're doing our job, and I think that's the key. But, off that, once again, the type of person and character that Michaela was to get on the plane, but also our appreciation. And, I think things go around in circles, because our appreciation, or the team's appreciation to Michaela when, the night before, was huge in regards to having a tea party and all this sort of stuff. But those things also, once again, build the culture, builds the team, and we also do it for Michaela. So, those little things count, but everybody, we're transparent in our processes, and I think that's the most important thing.
Well, Knowles, you're giving us some absolute gems already. That's already half time. Can you believe it? I know. So we'll take a quick break. Thanks to Special K, but don't go anywhere, because we will be back with more from Dame Knowles. Well, welcome back. We are still here, joined by Dame Knowles, and we've spoken about your people management within the team. Let's now move to outside the team and let's talk about the media and what influence they have. And I guess, obviously, being in sports, we do cop a lot of criticism. So, I guess how you manage all of that to do with media.
Yeah, and I think unless you're Trump, where you've got the old connection to either CNN or Fox, I'm not too sure. I think, I've grown in those aspects and how I think, what I think about the media. And I think as I've matured in my role as a head coach, I've understood better that we all have a role in the game. One of the things, or a couple of things that I've been able to bring in as strategy is once again is talking to people and actually trying to sell the story or trying to give as much information about where we're going and how we're going to do it. I think I'm more honest and open and not really scared to be able to front things when things aren't going really well, but also be all right if and just put my hand up and fess up, without sort of being dishonest. I was going to say something else, or just talking for the sake of talking. So I think I've gotten better in that respect, but the main thing where I think about media, as a lot of external people, is that they are part of the puzzle. They're an avenue to be able to sell the game to others. They're an avenue to be able to showcase netball, whether individuals, teams, to the outside world through their through what they do in their own job. I think the more information that they have and an understanding of the game, that actually helps them to write better articles or to be better netball reporters. I think that's really important. And I also think to spend time with them as well. I always know that people say, oh, you can't speak to the media or whatever, but at the end, we're all human. And at the end, we all need to do our job. So you just probably got to be a bit mindful as well that they do have a job to do, and not necessarily savvy with what you say, but also know that once it is out there, unless it's behind the scenes, that it is available for others to read. So you just got to be savvy about what you say, but can definitely use it as a positive to try and promote those within your team or the game as such within New Zealand or international wise.
I agree. That's something Julie Fitzgerald always taught us as well, that, you can use the media to promote our great game, especially with female sport and netball. We don't obviously get as much coverage as male sports and rugby, and we need to make ourselves available to use it. And then you're right, to give them information so that we can put the best part of netball out there. And I will say, one of my favourite parts of the Netball World Cup was sitting down with you the night before, doing our interviews and previewing the game the next day, and just like picking your brain. And what's that like for you when you have to do media before big events, big games at tournaments?
Yeah, I mean, that's part and parcel of, I think, head coach role now at this level or in the Silver Ferns or even at ANZ. I know when I was with Lightning or Magic, we'd even do prior to games, you go and either have talks with the media or you go and talk to the sponsors and those sort of things. And it's, once again, it's an avenue to sell the dream or sell your team, but it's all part and parcel of the role. I think you've got to, or coaches need to start to think broader. It's not just about you and the player, but also know that there are other pieces of the puzzle that can also help to benefit you. And if you can work those pieces, then it's going to be valuable to the sport in the long run. So I love it. I really do. Because if anything, I think sometimes for me, questions prompt, have I actually covered this? Have I, different questions. Have I covered this angle? Have I covered that strategy? And sometimes people bring something different out. I mean, even somebody walking down, down the street, everyone's got an opinion. And I like to make sure in the back of my mind that whatever they say to me, I've got that covered in my own head, whether through a strategy or got a plan B in place.
You speak about everyone's got an opinion, and obviously the criticism that we deal with, both you and with players. Now, I want to read a quote. I've got my book here by Brené Brown, and it's one of her quotes by Theodore Roosevelt, and she says, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena with his face smeared by dust and by sweat and by blood, and who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly." So how do you, so how do you, I guess, deal with the criticism, and also when you've got players who may be dealing with the criticism? Because at the end of the day, it is you and the team who are out there in the arena, and I guess you're getting this criticism from outside influences, even, I guess, younger players who are just playing for their club, and they can maybe have criticism from parents, people on the sideline. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, look, it's hard to be able to take criticism, and once again, it is comes with the landscape of, I suppose being either an elite player or a elite coach. But it's never easy, and I think one of the hardest thing is probably more the criticism that it impacts on your family. At least I can sort of either shrug it off and let it go, or not read things, whereas they're involved in other groups and probably can take it harder than what I do sometimes. So that's probably one of the things that I find difficult, is when they want to rack it up and start sending messages back on Facebook. So I just say, don't read it. Just don't go there, you know. It's a protective, I think it's a protective sign for the mother or wife or whoever. So, but once again, I think it is the lay of the land. It's you've got to take the good times with the bad times. If anything, I'm really tough on myself. So I like to be clear about is some of the things that people are saying, is it true, I suppose, in my own head? Has it, have I forgotten something or left something out? Is there some areas that I could possibly make a difference from what other people say? In saying that, you know, I have different people around me that I can trust. Sometimes if you pick up too many external things, and depending on the sources, it just does your head in. So I rely hugely on certain people that I know who are going to tell me what they're going to tell me, but also help provide solutions. I think that's a really important thing. I've got to be really clear on my overall strategy, and not only through my gut or knowing that I'm actually improving, but through clear data to show that we are actually improving. So I think that's really important to me. I do with players who get criticised, depending who they are. I do, well, either put people in and around them or try and talk it through. Sometimes, as I mentioned, and what others say, there is an element of truth, but also, once again, how can you work through things to actually get out the other side and to be better? You know, one of the masters, I must say, would be Irene van Dijk. I feel out of all her years that I had been involved with her, nearly for the 10 years with Magic, nearly every year she was nearly criticised about something coming out of the New Zealand scene, and every year she done something about it. Some of the criticism was hard for her to take, but after she got over the first initial emotion of it all, she had that brain or that mentality, right, I'm going to do something about it. So, you know, and after she left the game, then she was hailed as one of the best goal shooters in the world. So, like always, we don't like that stuff, but is that drive, that inner drive to actually be better and to get it right. And she was probably a good example of a person that was able to consistently do that.
She was in one of our clinics the other day, and she spoke about how you were her coach for so long and how honest you were, and getting to the end of her career, how you told her she's not as fast as what she thought she was. But she said she always, like you said, she always found a way to change her game, to make herself better, and then she would always look at herself and what that criticism was and think, okay, I am coming up against Liz Ellis. How can I change my game to be better? And you're right, she did take on, you know, whatever it may have been just to make herself, and use it, I guess, for her to make herself better in that regard.
Yeah, definitely used it as fuel. And a lot of people, a lot of athletes, I think, when they are such stars in their own right, they actually end using it as a fuel and a level of motivation to get them to that next level. And I suppose, yeah, a lot of players or a lot of people that I know, that's how they treat it and that's how it's managed. And I'm included as well, right, you buggers? Like, you know, listen, going, you know, so, and turn it around.
And you spoke earlier about communication, not only within the team, but for someone in your position, you've got to deal with sponsors, CEOs, the board as well. So how do you do that on top of everything else?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I've gotten better at that, and I think the first thing is opening up our either our venue or our trainings. I think I mentioned it last week in regards to the culture. You know, like more people who have input to that culture and feel like that they belong and part of the journey. It actually helps when you have to have those discussions, especially if there's a level of conflict, I suppose, that people know what the end result is. Not necessarily how you're going to get there, but they back or they trust what you're doing. So, you know, all those different parties alongside work with the players or the inner sanctum to get things done and to be part of the team. And that's really important in the first instance. But, you know, little things of saying hello, it's quite interesting, you know, at the end, I think people do want to belong and they want to be part of it. And little things of saying hello, how are you, you know, what are you up to, had a good day. That's always a good starting point. And then usually the discussions either happen from there or they don't. But I think just being hospitable is probably a very first start. And then seeing, as I say, how can you milk as much out of the situation as possible so that it's a win-win situation for everybody. And I think everyone has skin in it and everyone wants to do well.
Agree. And then obviously, finally, there's the fans who just love, well, I think you said in our last one when we were talking about culture, but they love seeing people going out there on court, playing good netball, and we sort of owe it as a service to the fans to give them that good game of netball that we all love, and I guess how you manage that or make them feel part of it all as well.
Yeah, once again, you know, there's certain times where the environment is opened up and we have people coming through, and then there's certain times where it's closed shop and we've got to do the business and get the job done. And, you know, it's little things like acknowledgement of people when we come into the stadium, whether it's the officials, whether it's the umpires, you know, or the general fans out in the, I think acknowledgement of one that they've paid a lot of money to actually get a ticket to be there, but also should be given a performance out there that's worth the value of them being there. I think that's really important. And I do think that there's appreciation that whether you win or lose, that people appreciate just netball and know that you've done the best. And I think that's really important. So, you know, like it goes back to the responsibilities in regards to our purpose as to why we are there and our identity. And that was mentioned last week. You know, it's always bigger than just us. And knowing that other people have skin in the game, or you know, the ultimate is to get another young person wanting to play the game to be future silver ferns, you know, and who's to know who's sitting in that stadium, who's eyeing up that goal shoot position or whatever it will be in the next 20 years. And that's really what it's all about. So, you know, I think it's that continuum over everybody who has presence in the stadium or behind the scenes that make our game so great, I believe. And at the end, we're all people, and we all want to belong, and we all want to communicate, and we all want to give our dollars worth, but we want to see good netball.
Awesome. I 100% agree with you. Well, That's time has flown. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. How good is that?
It's getting fast. I don't know if I'm talking more or I'm not too sure, but it's getting faster and faster every week.
It is, but we absolutely love it. So thank you so much, and thank you to Special K.